Hi everyone, and welcome to 164 Diecast. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. In this video, we're looking at the 1998 release of the Hot Wheels 2-car collector set called 25th Anniversary American Graffiti. The Mattel product number for this set is 19025. The set shown here is serial number A6422. This set showcases two iconic cars from the movie American Graffiti. The black 1955 Chevy 150, driven by Harrison Ford's character Bob Falfa, and the yellow 1932 modified Ford Coupe, driven by Paul LeMatt's character John Milner. Before George Lucas became widely famous for his Star Wars movies, there was failure, and almost failure. The movies THX 1138, The Failure, at least at the time it was made, and American Graffiti, which almost wasn't made. Released in 1973, American Graffiti is more than just a nostalgic look at 1962. It is the film that effectively built the modern Hollywood blockbuster era. Directed by a young George Lucas, it faced a rocky production, but became one of the most profitable movies ever made. Without American Graffiti, there would be no Star Wars. George Lucas was coming off the commercial failure of his first film, THX 1138, and was largely broke. The massive success of Graffiti gave him the financial independence and clout he needed to convince 20th Century Fox to take a chance on his space opera idea. The film was a massive launching pad for actors who were almost entirely unknown at the time. Harrison Ford was working as a carpenter to support his family when he was cast as Bob Falfa. He initially refused to cut his hair for the role, so he wore a Stetson hat throughout the movie. Ron Howard was cast partly because of a pilot he had filmed for a show called Happy Days. While the movie didn't cause the show to exist, its success helped greenlight the series, where Howard played a very similar character. For Richard Dreyfuss, this was his breakout role. He went on to star in Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind shortly after. Universal Pictures had so little faith in the film that they almost released it as a TV movie. Executives hated the title, suggesting alternatives like Another Slow Night in Modesto, and thought the multiple interweaving storylines were confusing. It was only after producer Francis Ford Coppola, fresh off the success of The Godfather, offered to buy the film from the studio himself that they agreed to a theatrical release. Several iconic moments in the movie were actually unscripted accidents, with the most notable being when Terry the Toad crashes his scooter into a trash can at Mel's Drive-In. It was a real accident. Actor Charles Martin Smith simply lost control, but Lucas kept it because it fit the character perfectly. Before American Graffiti, most movies used traditional orchestral scores. Lucas wanted the film to feel like a radio show, so he used 42 original rock and roll hits from the era. This was incredibly expensive and difficult to license at the time, consuming roughly 10% of the entire $777,000 budget. Its success popularized the pop music soundtrack that became a staple of 80s and 90s cinema. The movie made over $200 million worldwide and was shot almost entirely at night over 28 days. The setting was Modesto, California, but most scenes were actually shot in Petaluma, California. If you look closely at the license plate on John Milner's yellow 32 Ford, it reads THX 138. This was a direct nod to George Lucas's first, and at the time failed, feature film THX 1138. The license plate on the 32 Ford in this set also reads THX 138. Read more about the cars of this set at This early Mattel Hot Wheels collector set from 1998 is a look back at movie-making history, with the film that set the stage for what might arguably be called the greatest film series and most accomplished filmmaker of all time. Had George Lucas not had this movie made, Star Wars may never have existed. I hope you enjoyed this look at one of the great movies of cinema. And, as always, thank you for stopping by 164 Diecast. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And we will see you on the next video.